It's time now for the stock of the hour, which is actually a twofer because we've got International Game Technology and Everi. Their shares are jumping after Apollo agreed to buy a part of IGT and all of Everi, which is a gambling machines company. The price tag, $6.3 billion. Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Chris Palmieri in Los Angeles. Chris, what is Apollo's strategy in buying these two companies?
Well, so IGT was really the pioneer in the slot machine business in the U.S. They own that ubiquitous Wheel of Fortune game in casinos everywhere. But it was really not doing great. It had been bought by this Italian lottery company a few years ago. And the new industry darling was this Australian company called Aristocrat. It was really making all the exciting machines. And so they had come up with this idea to separate IGT business, and they cut this deal with Everi, a much smaller slot machine manufacturer. And Apollo, we had reported last year, was interested in IGT, and now just came and decided, well, we're just going to scoop them up. And obviously, they think they can do a better job than the current situation.
Okay, and IGT may be selling its gaming division, but will still remain a publicly traded company, right?
Yeah, I think they're not going to use the IGT name anymore, but it'll be the lottery business that existed before.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much for clarifying all of that. I want to get your thoughts, too, on the breaking news that we just told you about moments ago, which is Warner Brothers Discovery suing the National Basketball Association after the TV rights were awarded to rivals. This is a multi-step thing, but let's just take you through it, right? Because there was this period where everyone could bid, and Amazon bid for one portion of the games, and the NBA accepted it, and Warner Brothers Discovery was able to match it, and it did, and the NBA decided to move forward with Amazon. So now Warner Brothers Discovery is suing over what? The NBA making a decision not to go with it?
Right. Well, Warner Brothers is arguing that in their current contract, which expires next year, they pay a premium for the right to match a competing offer. Not an uncommon situation in these types of deals. What we're hearing the NBA is arguing or will likely argue, is that this isn't the same package that Warner Brothers had before. We kind of know why the NBA picked Amazon. For one, it's got a larger footprint of subscribers globally. It's obviously got a lot more money. And they just want to sort of go with this streaming partner in the future. But whether the contract is enforceable, that's something the court's going to ultimately decide, it looks like.
All right, so we should mention Warner Brothers Discovery shares are higher at the moment by about 26 cents at 82.55. Chris Palmieri, thank you so much for clarifying all of that for us. Chris Palmieri on our stocks of the hour and the latest with WBD suing the NBA. Coming up, we're going to turn to real estate with venture capitalist Kalea Warburg-Peters, who helped coin the term prop tech. This is Bloomberg.
Like Bloomberg.
This is the biggest single hosting event in the history of Airbnb. We have the number of people staying in an Airbnb here in Paris to fill the Olympic Stadium 5 times over. And they're spending over $1 billion when they're here in Paris.
That was Brian Chesky discussing the hype around the Paris Olympics. Brian Chesky, of course, founder of Airbnb. So let's bring in now Clelia Warburg-Peters. She is managing partner at Era Ventures and our own Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. Clelia, you have called Airbnb the most successful property tech company, which is really an area that you know well, having helped coin the term prop tech. What did prop tech look like before Airbnb, if at all, and what does it look like now?
Yeah. So I think that PropTech was pretty nascent about a decade ago, which was around the time that Airbnb was being founded. There, of course, were companies like Zillow, Trulia, but the broader disruption of the real estate industry, which is, the industry driving the most GDP across every economy in the world, was really in its very, very early days at that time.
So in terms of prop tech, this spring we had Austin Allison, co-CEO of Picasso, who I know you know, and of course their other co-CEO, a founder of Zillow. He said that home sharing, co-sharing of homes is the American dream. Do you agree? And do you think that Picasso could be, I love how you're nodding your head there. It's hard to know if we agreed with that also. Yeah. Do you think that Picasso could potentially be, say, the next Airbnb or Zillow?
I mean, I think that Picasso is offering a really interesting innovation, allowing people to share, in particular, second homes. And I do think that we have an affordability crisis across this country, and that different innovations that allow people to access home ownership are really valuable. Now, whether or not home sharing is actually a realization of the broader American dream, I think that's a legitimate question mark.
Yeah.
But I do think, Picasso started out to allow people to share vacation homes. And I think for many people, Picasso could allow them to access something that wouldn't otherwise be available to them, which would be a home in another place outside of their primary residence.
Well, sticking with homes, but more on the residential side, of course, there was that massive NAR lawsuit, the commission lawsuit settlement, $418 million. I know some of the measures go into effect this August. Even ahead of that, have we already seen the death of the 6% commission, the perception of that it just doesn't exist anymore?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting question that we are going to live the answer to over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. I personally think that the settlement was less of a big deal than it's been made out to be. Really, the settlement was very kind of nuts and bolts, like here's the regulation about what can and cannot be displayed on MLSs and the types of agreements that buyers agents and sellers agents can make between themselves. The settlement did not in any way require that commissions come down. It just required that the bits and pieces of the transaction be tied up better. But I believe that the way that the media has covered news around the settlement and the perception now on the part of consumers that their commissions are going to come down are going to kind of set up this standoff between the real estate industry and consumers that I do think is going to result ultimately in lower commissions. But I think they may be less low than the media is currently suggesting, because I think that there's really no requirement that real estate agents bring these commissions down, and that I think what you're going to see is that there will be a push on the part of many sellers to say, I don't want to pay this.
Right.
I'm going to list my home with the understanding that we won't pay a buyer's agent, and then there are going to be fewer people who come and see their home, and then they're going to moderate over time.
So there's a lot of things that kind of have to happen, and there's obviously a lot of confusion, as you put it. What does this mean for the housing portals like Zillow, like Redfin, which you could consider prop tech companies. Isn't this good for them because people will be going on those sites and looking for more information?
So Zillow, Redfin, those I think are some of the leading prop tech companies, right? But you have to think about what the different business models of those businesses actually are. So I think Zillow and Redfin are actually in distinctly different positions. A business like Zillow is really an advertising agency for buyer's agents. As you know, we think of Zillow as being a portal just to look at listings, but Zillow's business model is they're selling that lead traffic to buyer's agents. So if buyer's agents are suddenly in a worse position in the market, if they have less money, if you make less money as a buyer's agent, a portal like Zillow could actually be in a really compromised position. And that's part of why you've seen Zillow over the course of the past few years really push to diversify their offering to try to create offerings that are more focused on sellers and sellers agents.
And I should have mentioned before, the reason that we skipped to residential is you are the former president of Warburg Realty. In terms of the settlement and the changes that are going to come, and knowing that there's nothing official relative to commissions, what real changes will be affected? And if everything else remained equal, do you think that just that perception that commissions have already dropped, maybe not as much as the media is portraying or people think, do you think that it's going to have an actual effect on residential values?
I think we're going to have to see, and I think it will vary somewhat by market. So I think that this will probably impact luxury markets less because I think that people in luxury markets are more used to working with professionals in different parts of their financial life, and that people will continue to be committed to working with really strong buyers and sellers agents in luxury markets. I think that in the middle market, the average American home worth generally around $300,000 right now. For a seller or buyer in that market, 6% is often equivalent to their entire life savings.
Yeah, wow.
So for them, that is a really meaningful difference. And I think you will see people really push more in that middle market segment to have commissions come down.
Era Ventures Managing Partner Claylia Warburg Peters and Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much. That does it for Bloomberg Markets. This is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The Obama endorsement is in the bag. Now time for a running mate. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Vice President Kamala Harris lands the Obama endorsement, checking the final box among Democrats. And we're going to bring you new polling from the swing states just ahead from Spencer Kimball at Emerson College Polling Center. Bloomberg's Michael McKee will join us this hour with a tame reading on inflation this morning, what it means for the economy and for politics. And of course, we'll have analysis from our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are along for the ride. After we take a look at Wall Street right now, let's see how the numbers are playing in the markets with an update from Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey,
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. A substantial rally now underway. Every major group in the S&P 500 higher on bets at the start of the Fed easing cycle will keep fueling the outlook for corporate America. Here's where we stand. S&P at 54.83, another leg higher in the past few minutes, up 84 points, just about the best level of the day, up 1.6%. Dow Jones Industrial Average now surging by 807 points, up 2%. NASDAQ, the composite index, up 1.5%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 1.6%, while the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares also taking part in today's advance, up by 1.4%. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.20% with the 2-year 4.38% right now. Gold up $24 the ounce, higher by 1%, $23.89 the ounce. And a retreat for West Texas intermediate crude 77.46 right now, lower by 1%. 3M shares are surging the most in more than 36 years after raising its full-year profit forecast as its new CEO vows to reinvigorate the iconic manufacturer's innovation engine. We've got shares of 3M up now by about 19.4%. So again, recapping, stocks are advancing. S&P, best level of the day, up 86 right now, up 1.6%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington, and once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to see you with news on the economy and politics that we need to talk about, all colliding here in a fascinating way to end what has been an historic week in American politics. As we wake up this morning to news, the PCE, the Fed's favored price gauge, rising at a mild pace, spending holding up, fulfilling the hopes, at least, of the Biden administration to where we might be by the time voters are hitting the polls in the fall. It's even got some outliers calling for an interest rate cut next week. I know you don't think that's going to happen, but it's the kind of conversation that this White House wants to be having in Washington and wants to be having with Michael McKee. Bloomberg economics editor joins us right now live from New York with his take on this. Michael, I don't know if you're going to tell me there's trouble under the hood, but this seems like a pretty good stretch of data. And if we're looking for a trend, is this number 3? Have we found one?
Well, it is a good stretch of data, and the numbers aren't that bad, but you could argue it both ways. The administration will glom onto the fact that personal spending rose at a healthy pace the last 2 months, and that inflation was down. The PCE headline number now 2.5% for the year, the core 2.6%, both within shouting range of the 2% target the Fed is looking for, so rate cuts could be in the offing. However, personal income did not rise as much as anticipated, and wages were half what they were in the month of May. So if you were on the other side, you could say the economy is slowing, and then it's a question of how much is it slowing? Are we falling off a cliff? I'm sure one party would make that assumption. And are we doing okay? You'd get from the other side.
If you're Jay Powell, though, Michael, you're looking at this and saying, I love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah, because the GDP numbers for the second quarter, which came out yesterday, showed that growth was stronger than expected and led by personal and business spending. So that part of the economy is doing well. And we haven't yet seen a fall off in the labor markets as jobless claims, which are usually distorted in July anyway, have come back down. Now, the jobs number next week is going to be very important, but it does come after the Fed meeting. everybody's going to be watching to see if we still get the same rough amount of jobs created, somewhere between 175 and 200,000. And then the unemployment rate, whether it goes up. That would be a harder thing for the Democrats to sell.
Harder to sell, but confirming, I assume, for the Federal Reserve. What do you say to the few analysts and economists out there predicting a cut for next week? Too early for a data-dependent Fed, or too early to communicate to the markets?
Too early for the markets. The Fed doesn't like to surprise the markets, and they haven't made a case for lowering rates at this meeting. So unless they decide that the data have pushed them, or they're worried that they're going to fall behind, they're not going to be raising rates this time. The real question is how strong a hint do we get in their statement and from Jay Powell in his press conference about September, and that being the time, that's when the markets think they're going to do it.
Spending, talking about the consumer spending number is interesting to me because the savings rate in this case fell to 3.4%, the lowest since December 22. Michael, what does that tell us about where we are with our savings from COVID? We're digging into it. We've already burned through it.
Well, mostly we've burned through it, but it depends on your income strata. The Fed and the BLS also slice and dice the income numbers. And when you look at it by quintile, the people in the top 20% saw a bump from their COVID payments. Then their total assets went down a little bit, and now they're rising again. That's not true for people in the bottom quintile, the lowest 20%. Their bump went up and then came back down, and it's staying down, basically. It's gone up a little bit in the last few months, but not nearly as much. So it is the people who make less money, who are on the lower end of the income scale, who are suffering the most at this point. And then that has a spillover effect on the economy because they spend most of what they earn because they don't have any money to put into savings. So it's a sort of it could be cast as a tale of two economies.
Understood, as always. You're coming down for the Fed meeting next week, I presume. Will Jay Powell and policymakers telegraph the first rate cut in the statement, or when you gather in the same room with Jay Powell for the news conference?
Well, it's an interesting question. They probably will change the statement to acknowledge that inflation is coming down. They've basically been saying it's still elevated is the word they use. And if they do change the statement, markets will take that as a hint, and then we'll all press Jay Powell to try to go beyond that and give us a date, which he'll try to avoid doing, but I'm sure he'll find some euphemism for pretty soon.
Michael McKee, thank you, and we'll see you in D.C. Bloomberg TV economics editor Michael McKee getting us started here on Balance of Power, reminding you that the flow here on economic data goes directly into the political conversation here in Washington, D.C. And what world will we be in? What will that feel like if there is an interest rate cut in September, right around the same time Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are set reportedly to debate, and people start really making up their minds on how they're going to vote in November? It couldn't be more important to us here on Balance of Power. As we stick with the beat, of course, on politics and add the voice of an expert, Spencer Kimball, who runs the polling center at Emerson College, is with us. And it's great to have you back, Spencer. Welcome back to Balance of Power. I want to get into some new polling. This is really important because Emerson was one of the first to emerge, if not the first, with swing state data in the wake of Joe Biden stepping down and dropping out of this race. And we do have head-to-head numbers on Trump versus Harris. Important to note here, as I read from Emerson College, that Vice President Kamala Harris is trailing Donald Trump in 4 states and tied in another. That would be Wisconsin. But I want to start at a higher level with you, Spencer, before we dig into the granular here. The Trump campaign has been trying to telegraph this as essentially a blip on the radar. It's the same race, the same candidate, just with a different name. In fact, we keep hearing about the Biden-Harris administration when Donald Trump speaks and Republicans kick out messages this week. How about you as a pollster? Is this a game changer? Are we throwing up the pieces in the air? Or is this just a slight aberration on the way to November?
Well, Joe, I think it was a game changer in the sense that after the first debate with President Biden, the Democrats were slowly drifting away from his or supporting his candidacy. And with Harris now, the presumption nominee, she kind of bounced back. She got that younger vote coming back to her. She's got some of that minority vote. So I'm not sure if it's enough to put her over the top, but it's definitely brought it back to a competitive race.
So let's take a look here. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, you can see the data as we follow along with Emerson College here. Arizona, you've got 44 for Kamala Harris, 49 for Trump. He's leading as well in Georgia, 48-46. He's leading in Michigan, 46-45. Pennsylvania, 48-46. And we're tied in Wisconsin. You could argue that these are the 5 states that will determine the race. Our swing state poll, in fact, includes 7. But Spencer, that tie in Wisconsin should tell us a lot. And how do these compare to where we were with Joe Biden?
Well, it's interesting. Out in the Midwest, you're watching Harris competing much stronger than where Biden ended up last week after the debate. But where she struggles is out in Arizona. And Arizona is different than these other states. When we ask them their most important issue, for Arizona, it's immigration, 30%. All of these other states that you mentioned, 40% was economy, was their top issue. And Arizona's different, and that's why potentially you're seeing a different result there at a 5-point lead, while all of the other polls are within 1 or 2 points.
Not a surprise then to see GOP ads, and there have been several already made targeting Kamala Harris, all focus on her record on immigration and border policy. Is that going to be the Achilles heel for the Kamala Harris campaign, knowing that she was assigned to the border by Joe Biden?
Well, certainly former President Trump will try to connect her to that issue. We'll see, obviously, out west how much that's going to play. We're going to take a look at New Mexico and Nevada, where that might be a big issue for those voters on the border. But then we got to look at the Midwest and see how they're playing with immigration. That's really a secondary issue. It's about 10% as the most important issue in those states. And as I mentioned, the economy, that's up at 40%. So while there might be some benefit on, some movement on the immigration, I think in those other states, it's going to be about the economy.
You talked to Democrats about who delegates should support here. And pretty remarkable considering where we were, Spencer, even a week ago, talking about various governors, whether it was Cooper or Beshear, Shapiro, Whitmer. The Democrat bench was full, we heard. And within, my goodness, 24 hours of Joe Biden announcing his decision when he kicked out that letter, Kamala Harris had the delegates to close the deal. What did you learn from talking with Democrats in this poll?
Well, generally speaking, they're rallying around Harris. As you notice, about 80% in each state would like Harris to be the nominee. And so that, I think, has a lot to do with some fallout from President Biden's debate performance, where Democrats were really concerned about not being able to beat Donald Trump. They see in Vice President Harris a potential candidate who will be more competitive. And that's what we're seeing in the numbers.
Let's play the Veep stakes here. You asked voters about her selection of a running mate, Spencer. What did you learn?
Well, each state has their favorite son or daughter. We can go up to Michigan and they want their governor, Gretchen Whitmer. If we go out to Arizona, they want their senator, Mark Kelly. Georgia, Wisconsin, they're not quite sure. They kind of jump around between Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. But probably the strongest candidate out there is Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. Very popular in his home state. And Pennsylvania has the most electoral votes up for grabs.
Well, yeah, just among Democratic voters overall, Shapiro gets 57%. Next in line, Mark Kelly at 42%. Is it because Democrats believe Shapiro can carry Pennsylvania for Kamala Harris?
Well, I'm not sure if that's what's driving Shapiro's support, but I do notice is that he's got a lot of support amongst younger voters. And we don't really see that with any other Democratic candidate except for Bernie Sanders. So it would be interesting if he could kind of carry that baton of the youth vote that Bernie Sanders has been carrying for about 8 years.
Well, it's interesting, too, to see Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, 42% prefer their senator. Maybe that shouldn't be a surprise. But I wonder your thoughts on the Sun Belt versus the Rust Belt. Our Republican analyst, Rick Davis, was talking about this a bit earlier, that we spent so much time talking about the blue wall, that it was Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And Kamala Harris may be opening a new path in the Sun Belt states. Do you agree?
Not right now. Look at Arizona. That's a big 5 points right there that she has to make up. And the top issue there is not something that is her strength. Maybe on the economy, as you were mentioning earlier, it seems to be rebounding. The markets are doing better. That might be, Bidenomics might be a campaign theme more than the immigration. So it's going to be interesting in the Sun Belt. North Carolina was a state that we kind of moved off of the swing states. We'll see if she can bring it back in. About a fifth of the population there is African American, so that might give her a bounce in North Carolina. But I think giving up that blue wall, that's a big path for the Democratic success, and I would be very hesitant to do that.
So it sounds a lot like Shapiro to me based on this conversation, but I know the rules change based on the campaign. You asked an important question, Spencer, and I don't mean to be reading into this. You can tell me if I'm going in the wrong direction here, but a majority of Democratic voters in each state you talk to think Kamala Harris should be nominated at the Democratic National Convention this August. Does that imply that they do not want her to be nominated in this virtual call about a week from now?
I'm not sure about that. I think the virtual call is kind of going under the radar. That has to deal with the Ohio ballot access issue.
Yes.
It's going to have to obviously deal with potentially her running mate if that call has to go forward. It's a little gray about, the necessity of that call. But regarding the convention, I don't think that they would mix it up. I think they're looking for a new horse, and they were concerned that the president wasn't going to be able to win. And that's why we're seeing this.
As we spend time with Spencer Kimball from Emerson College polling out with some of the first swing state data we're seeing since Joe Biden dropped out of the race. We're waiting for a debate. Spencer, I bet you are too. And it's interesting because we don't know if we're going to have one now. Kamala Harris tweeting last night, what happened to anytime, any place? Because Donald Trump, I guess, doesn't like the venue or the network here that we were looking at for the next one. Trump spokesman Steve Chung says debate plans, quote, cannot be finalized until Democrats formally decide on their nominee. Based on your experience, do you think Trump's trying to get out of this? And will that have a bearing on polling and the final results in November? Voters want to see these two on stage together, right?
I would think so. I'm hoping that there'll be a debate. Obviously, the last debate had tremendous impact on this race, and so we'll see what the next debate might have. But with that said, voters are going to kind of come back in after Labor Day and focus in. And we've seen this previous years. If you remember, 16 years ago, John McCain was up 2 points after his convention and ends up losing to Obama by 7 or 8. So we see these swings in the polls when different things occur. This is a big shakeup, and I think it's going to take a few weeks for things to settle down.
Interesting to see no Trump convention bump. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that Trump kind of got his bump the previous week on the attempted assassination. Yeah, right. You saw it in the polls. He was up 6 points nationally. We haven't seen a Republican up that much since George Bush in 88. So that was that was a big bump. He seems, with Biden dropping out on Sunday, that seems to have taken away that momentum, if there was momentum with the J.D. Vance pick. And then now we're going to talk about the Democrats.
Well, I'm glad you could join, as always, Spencer Kimball with the breakdown on new numbers from Emerson College polling, where he is the director. We'll play it to the panel next. Rick Davis, by the way, says they lost by 6, but who's counting? This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks heading for their best day since February after key economic data this morning bolstered speculation that the Federal Reserve will be setting the stage next week for a rate cut in September. S&P up 83 to 54.83 in advance of 1.6%. The Dow's up 787 points now, a gain of 2%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index is up 254 points, up by 1.5%. 10-year at 4.20% with a 2-year 4.38%. Spot gold is climbing by $21 the ounce, up 0.9%. A retreat for crude, 77.46 a barrel right now on WTI, down by 1.1%. Big move for Bitcoin, up 3.3%, 67,444 on Bitcoin. Charter Communication shares are rallying after the cable and wireless company reported revenue that beat analyst estimates, boosted by a surge in residential mobile service. Charter up now by 16.8%. Again, recapping, stocks are rallying. S&P up 84, a gain of 1.6%. 10-year 4.20%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, and here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet with the Friday Trade. We thank you, sir. We'll be back with Charlie a little bit later on this hour as we keep tabs on the markets. Always here as we talk politics on Balance of Power. Thanks for joining us on the Friday edition. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where yesterday it was all about Benjamin Netanyahu here, meeting with the President of the United States. We talked about it at length. We brought you in the Oval Office for the pool spray, as they call it, as these two sat down, not agreeing on everything these days, certainly when it comes to a ceasefire. But there was another meeting that Benjamin Netanyahu held yesterday, and that was with the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Now, of course, suddenly at the top of the ticket, she gets her own sit-down, her own one-on-one with Benjamin Netanyahu, having an opportunity to delve into foreign policy. And unlike the president, this is really interesting, Kamala Harris spoke to the press after her meeting. We did not hear from Joe Biden following his. Here's a bit of what she said.
It is time for this war to end, and end in a way where Israel is secure, all the hostages are released, the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can exercise their right to freedom, dignity, and self-determination.
We assemble our panel for their take on this moment in the campaign. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. Of course, Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature panel. And a really interesting take earlier today in Politico, Jeannie, that in fact, Kamala Harris is saying all of the same things, essentially, almost word for word, as Joe Biden. But her words are being interpreted differently by Democrats here in Washington, many of whom have been critical of Joe Biden for the lack of a ceasefire deal, for the number of civilian casualties in Gaza. How does she leverage this moment for her campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that assessment. I think for many Democrats, we all know this has been such a divisive issue. And yesterday's speech, if you will, by Kamala Harris was so important because it's the first time we've heard her speak out in her own voice, not just as an emissary of Joe Biden on a foreign policy issue. And what struck me was how similar it was in substance to the Biden campaign, or the Biden administration rather, but how her words were being interpreted differently, in part because her rhetoric is a bit different. She was, it was noticeable, for instance, that she took the time to carefully read out the names of each of those American hostages held by Hamas. She talked about the fact that Israel has a right to defend itself. And then she also walked this line of saying that she understands and is sensitive to the amount of civilian casualties and devastation in the Gaza Strip. So from that perspective, the rhetoric was a little bit sharper, if you will, than Joe Biden's has ever been, but the substance was the same. And I think this is something that is going to be left unresolved for Democrats. That's the first time. And in my mind, she's walking a very similar line to the Biden administration. Let's get a deal done. But there's not really a different path forward to doing that, if you will.
This is interesting to me, Rick. I wonder your thoughts as we hear from a former staffer to two members of the squad, Rashida Tlaib and Cori Bush. This is Abbas Alaway writing, Harris conveyed more sympathy for the plight of civilians in Gaza than President Biden did at any point. Abbas is the person who led the uncommitted movement in Michigan, Rick. Kamala Harris really isn't saying much different from Joe Biden in this case, is she?
No, this is just situational politics. They needed a scalp because they had been losing within their own caucus, the Democrats, on this issue. The far left, disagreed with the vast majority of Democrats. So they had to be mad at Biden. Biden was just as empathetic for the plight of civilians and Palestinians as anybody else in the party was going to be, but that wasn't going to be good enough for the left flank of his party. And so they took it out on him. And it created a weakness at a time when he was trying to consolidate the party. So they did some pretty good damage to Joe Biden at the time. Now, he's gone. Long live the king. Kamala Harris has done a much better job than anybody expected her to consolidate the Democratic Party in less than a week. And they are attributing the exact same statement she's making that Biden made to being a new look. And frankly, an amazing opportunity for her to seem like she's different than Joe Biden, which is a positive politically, right, without actually taking any risk to do it.
Well, I suspect she'll seem pretty different than Donald Trump on this issue if they get on a debate stage, Jeannie, and I'd like to hear your thoughts from both of you on this. I thought we had a debate. Everybody was a tough guy a minute ago. The Trump campaign now refusing to debate with Kamala Harris because she's not officially the nominee. Trump spokesman Stephen Chung issuing a statement here that plans cannot be finalized, quote, until Democrats formally decide on their nominee, knowing, of course, that, well, the debate was set for September. Nominating process happens in August. Harris posting on X in response, what happened at any time, any place? Jeannie, will there be one?
Let us hope. I am hoping there will be. It's fascinating because Donald Trump was willing to debate Joe Biden when he wasn't nothing more than she is the presumptive nominee. And so you see Kamala Harris there showing a little bit of bravado. What happened to anywhere, anytime, any place. I suspect it depends in part on where we are poll-wise and everything else, whether this goes forward, and what the rules of something like this look like. I've heard from people on the Democrat side who say that they don't know if this is something that Kamala Harris should do, but I am sure hoping that she does. And I think looking at the last debate, it can change a lot in these races. So we do have Americans really deserve to hear from both of them together.
What do you think about this one, Rick? Who has more to lose? Will there be a debate?
Well, I didn't think Joe Biden should debate Donald Trump, which turned out to be a disaster. And I got to tell you, I think they are high-fiving each other down in Mar-a-Lago. I mean, Susie Wiles has to be thrilled with that statement because the last thing they want to do is put Donald Trump on a stage with Kamala Harris. He is not a good debater. He's lost virtually every debate he's ever had. He would have lost the debate with Joe Biden had he not had a complete collapse by Joe Biden. It was a horrible debate for him. And once you see through the smoke, you realize this is not the way they want to conduct their campaign. They want to keep the attention on Kamala Harris, and they're going to do it through TV and radio and social media. And they don't need to risk getting on a stage with her. And so they'll find all kinds of different ways to avoid it. But my bet is they avoid it to the end.
Well, pretty remarkable when you consider the money that's already being spent in the ad wars here. MAGA PAC, the main PAC supporting Trump, adding $32 million in ads, attacking Kamala Harris through Labor Day. Jeannie, Future Forward, the big Dem PAC backing Harris, is going to spend $50 million on advertising in 6 states over the next 3 weeks. This gets back to what we were talking about yesterday. This is the race to identify Kamala Harris. Who's going to win it?
Yeah, the race to define Kamala Harris. And it is anybody's game right now. It is a jump ball, and Democrats really have to catch up on this. There is a great YouGov poll which shows the fact that voters see her policy-wise as similar to Joe Biden, and that is liberal, and that is going to be a problem for her in those key Rust Belt states that you were just talking about. So she really needs to define herself, and we're hearing that, but we need to hear more of that.
What do you think about this, Rick? The Republican ads from this week that were created in the wake of Joe Biden's announcement all refer to the Biden-Harris administration. Is that the right strategy, and is that what we're going to get the rest of the campaign?
I would. There's no question she's a part of it. She's been party to all those decisions. The economy especially has suffered under the Biden-Harris administration. And why not? It's fair game. I think that this is part of what they're going to try to do in this interim period, go into her convention. Obviously, she has to do a better job than the president has done defining what they have accomplished on the economy and what their plan is going forward. It'll be interesting to see whether she rolls out a more aggressive inflation fighting program than what the administration is currently pursuing.
That would be fascinating. Are they spending enough in this case? Rick, Future Forward, the Democrat PAC, spending $50 million on ads, as I mentioned, in 6 states. Is that a number that you would have arrived at?
Look, I mean, I think combined with what the Harris campaign can spend on their, now that we've been hearing anecdotally.
Rick there. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello?
I got
Hello?
you now, Rick. Finish your thought, yeah.
Hey, great. Democrats have been outspending Trump 6-1. I don't think that percentage is going to change much. They've got a load of cash there.
Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano, great conversation and a great analysis from both of you. Rick, we heard you and appreciate your finishing your thought here on Balance of Power. Much more to follow with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. They'll join us on the late edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's bring you up to date on world and national news. Right now, Amy Morris joins us from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Service on France's high-speed trains was disrupted by what officials are describing as coordinated sabotage ahead of the Olympic opening ceremonies. Jean-Pierre Farandou is the chief executive of France's state railways company, SNCF, and he says it's still too early to know who is responsible for this.
There's an inquiry running at the moment, so the police force are looking after, of course, the people who have committed this assault against the French network.
SNCF's Jean-Pierre Farandou. The railway company estimates 800,000 passengers have been affected by what it describes as a massive attack aimed at paralyzing the high-speed line network. Barack and Michelle Obama endorsing Kamala Harris in the Democratic race for president. The former president and first lady released a video this morning showing Vice President Harris speaking on the phone with both of them.
I am looking forward to doing this with the two of you, Doug and I both, and getting out there, being on the road. But most of all, I just want to tell you the words you have spoken and the friendship that you have given over all these years mean more than I can express. So thank you both.
In a joint statement, the Obamas said that there was no doubt in their mind that Kamala Harris can win. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Every major group in the S&P 500 rising on bets that the start of the Fed easing cycle will keep fueling the outlook for corporate America. Stocks on track for their best day since February after key economic data this morning bolstered speculation that the Fed will be setting the stage next week for a rate cut in September. Yes, we'll have Jay Powell's remarks live on Bloomberg Radio and television. Make sure you catch it live here on Bloomberg. S&P right now up 63, a gain of 1.2%. The Dow up 657, up by 1.7%. NASDAQ higher by 167, up 1%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up now by 1.2%. 10-year 4.20% with a 2-year 4.38%. Spot gold up $18 the ounce, up 0.8%, 23.82. And West Texas Intermediate crude now down 1.2%, 77.34 barrel. Bottom line, big rally underway. Shares of 3M are surging 18.5%, the most in more than 36 years after raising its full-year profit forecast. And U.S. authorities are accusing the famed short seller Andrew Left of committing fraud through stock trades, social media posts, and research reports, their biggest move in a years-long crackdown against traders who tout their bearish bets. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 63, up 1.2%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington, and once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We're live from Washington, D.C. with our eyes on the campaign trail and today's economic data, as we have been discussing both over the course of 2 hours here. A major moment, we can all agree, an historic moment in American politics here. It's also an historic moment for the media business, with hundreds of millions of dollars already spent on ads, more reserved on ads, and even more will be spent in the late fall as we make our way to November, with the news media struggling to cover this the right way, having gone through this before with a Donald Trump and a female Democratic presidential candidate. We've talked a lot about the rhetoric at play here and the challenges facing a news media tasked with live fact-checking and, of course, bearing out the truth here from both campaigns. We're joined by Jane Hall, back with us on Bloomberg, American University professor of journalism and media studies and author of the book Politics in the Media, Intersections and New Directions. Jane, welcome back. It looks like a new direction for us here, but it also feels back to the future in a way, as we're reminded of some of the rhetoric that Donald Trump has been using on the campaign trail, referring to Kamala Harris as dumb as a rock, as a radical, wants to be the president for savage criminals and illegal aliens. To what extent is this going to resonate with voters, having already heard some of this stuff before, and how should the news media be covering it?
It is in some ways back to the future, but I think that this is a very different moment in the media and in our politics than when Hillary Clinton had to figure out whether to call out Donald Trump for literally circling her on the stage. Kamala Harris is clearly moving to define herself and outrank and outrace Donald Trump and trying to tie her to the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. And what's very interesting to me is that if they do debate, and she's calling for that split screen, she will be far more effective, of course, than Joe Biden was able to be. But she also, I will be very interested to see how she says that she's going to prosecute the case. You know, if the news media call him out and ask him, how do you feel being called a 78-year-old criminal? They're clearly going to ask her, how do you feel being called a DEI hire? You know, that was one of the things that happened in the debates. And I think what's going to be interesting to see is, are the media going to ask her and him about the terrible things that are already racist, sexist, misogynist? You know, I think the other thing is that they don't seem to really know how to deal with a woman candidate. They seem to have been caught flat-footed. He said, I'm not going to be nice. He's deliberately mispronouncing her name. And that all reads as kind of a redo of Barack Obama in many ways, saying that he was not a legitimate citizen. The birther thing that happened. I mean, I think that the fact that they're being warned not to be racist and sexist, and they may not be able to keep Trump from doing that, is in Kamala Harris's favor ultimately.
Remarkable. It seems the Speaker of the House knows what you're talking about. We heard about this, Mike Johnson and Representative Richard Hudson, who chairs the NRCC, tasked with getting Republicans elected, asking members to cool the rhetoric. They can't do this with Donald Trump, but they did ask rank and file members of the House, Republican members, to stop with the DEI hire. To your point, I think it was Glenn Grothman, Representative Republican from Wisconsin, said that she was the likely nominee, quote, because of her ethnic background, unquote. This is part of the composite that you're talking about here. And it's one thing to cool it off in the House. It's a different thing for Donald Trump. You just said, he just said yesterday, I'm not going to stop being critical of Kamala Harris. So what are we in for?
Well, I think we're in for a campaign that is going to be fought very, very strongly, as you all mentioned in the ads. The right-wing media are clearly going to try to tie her to what is a big issue for them, immigration. I mean, that's one where I think she's vulnerable because she was tasked with that. And she's, they're going to make the point that a bipartisan bill didn't pass because of Donald Trump. But she's going to be smeared in the right-wing media. Fox News is going to go after her. Trump is going to go after her. But what she has in her favor, I believe, is that the policies that have been enacted, the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court, policies that they can frame as anti-women of color. I think she's already benefiting also from all the memes and the social media. You can't buy that. That is organic. Young people saying, this is exciting. She's going to have to win over people beyond young people, but she's clearly already moving ahead among voters on the Democratic side. And, there are a lot of women over 50 who are a huge component. They aren't talked about as much, but there are a lot of women who don't like seeing another woman derided that way. Forget whether it's racist or misogynist or both. I mean, I think they got a real problem if they try to link her that way. And I think, as I've said, it's going to be out there, whether it's stated explicitly or whether it's under the radar. And she has an opportunity to reframe that just by saying, this is what I've done. This is who I've been.
Sure. It goes both ways, of course. You may not find an equivalency here, but what do you make of the whole weird talk of the Democrats describing Republicans? It got to the point now where ABC News even wrote this up. Democrats' new line of attack on Republicans. You're being weird. This goes back to something that Kamala Harris said back in 2016, if Trump had followed her around the stage, something that you brought up earlier. But we're getting now Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, supposedly on the short list for vice president, saying this on MSNBC on Tuesday. These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away, be in your exam room. These are weird ideas. Is weird the new deplorable?
Oh, that's a very good point. I hope everybody knows you're referring to Hillary Clinton's remarks about a basket full of deplorables that she said. Yeah. I think that personally, I think going after anybody who's a voter who is on any side and calling them weird is not exactly the way to win. You can say they have weird ideas. Unfortunately for the Republicans, J.D. Vance has been called out and video has been shown where he talks about women, the phrase, childless cat ladies. I think that some of that is going to be talked about as being weird. But I do see an equivalency. I mean, I don't think you should be demonizing any voter if you want to get elected. I think what Democrats have been hoping for is somebody who could talk about what they've done and also take the fight to Donald Trump. I mean, that is what I think she is highly capable of doing.
Well, just like that, our crack team of producers has brought us a piece of tape to show what we're talking about and a couple of voices we're going to hear. Let's listen.
seems to be drifting away from his own nominee because he's had so many weird views that he's expressed.
I see Donald Trump talking about the wonderful Hannibal Lecter or whatever weird thing he's on tonight. That needs to end.
What was weird was him joking about racism today and then talking about Diet Mountain Dew. Who drinks Diet Mountain Dew?
So you have Governors Pritzker and Walz talking there earlier. Look, I realize this is part of the game here, Jane. Obviously, you need a thick skin to be in politics. But do Democrats, does Kamala Harris need to call off the dogs the way Speaker Johnson did in the House?
Wow, that's such an interesting question. I personally, I come from a part of the state where there are a lot of Republican voters. I'm not sure. I think you can go after J.D. Vance just as J.D. Vance is going to go after Kamala Harris. I mean, people use their vice presidents as attack dogs. I hate to use that phrase, but I'm conservative on this. I think talk about what J.D. Vance said, talk about the policies, take the stance that Trump wants to take women back and people of color back. But I think it's early to say, but to call any voter weird, in my mind, you can say J.D. Vance is weird or J.D. Vance's ideas are weird. That's going to resonate because he's got a trail of video that is very odd in terms of women and children. It's just true.
Well, if you were watching, the Milwaukee convention on that Thursday night to see Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt off and the whole experience, you might have different ideas about who they were trying to reach and what exactly the message was in prime time there, Jane. I have to ask you, and weigh in on it if you want in our last couple of minutes, but if we'd known about this, Kamala Harris, top of the ticket, before Donald Trump chose J.D. Vance, would he have gone with a different running mate?
Ooh, man, you're asking such good questions, in my opinion. I don't know. I think he went for somebody that he thought, would be a red meat person. I don't know if they would have made a different choice. They could have gotten Nikki Haley to run. They might have had a stronger ticket.
Nikki Haley, Tim Scott. I just wonder if they had gone in a direction other than another white man. Imagine the debate between Kamala Harris and Elise Stefanik or whomever Kamala Harris's running mate would be. Something to consider, isn't it?
Well, it is. We're into a whole gender thing. I mean, Hulk Hogan's, as the definition of men in this country, that's an argument that's very, very interesting in terms of gender and media. She's organizing white people, men for Kamala. I mean, they are very candidly going for a broader audience than might be perceived as being the narrow appeal that the Republicans are going to try to say she has.
Mm-hmm. We started this with a conversation about media coverage. How important is it for these two to debate, Jane? Because it looks like we're dancing around this idea now. Kamala Harris is saying, what happened to anytime, anywhere? Donald Trump says we need an official nominee. This isn't going to happen, is it?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what I would advise. I mean, I think Kamala Harris is smart enough to know the traps for a woman. Women still have traps if they're too strident, if their voice is wrong. I mean, Hillary Clinton endured an awful lot of this. So, I think it would be to her advantage to be able to talk about what her administration has done. I don't see any advantage to his doing it. Other than, I cannot imagine how anybody advising him would. He managed to hold it together in an hour and a half with Joe Biden. I mean, he has a record of going off the rails, particularly around women. I would not advise him to debate with her. Maybe she can debate an empty chair. Maybe they'll figure out some way that they can talk about how he isn't willing to debate her.
That's 2 this hour. Rick Davis said the same thing. Jane, it's great to have you back. We appreciate it, as always. Jane Hall at American University. The book is Politics in the Media, Intersections and New Directions. And boy, we are taking a new direction here, it seems. Watching Wall Street, by the way, does Kamala Harris need to start tweeting the markets? Maybe this is the new way to find some sunlight between herself and Joe Biden. Donald Trump would be tweeting all day today, Tim Stenovic. The Dow's up 670 points.
Yeah, I don't know. It had never been the Biden-Harris administration's thing. But then again, Joe, if she is trying to put some daylight between her and Joe Biden, maybe she does have to break from tradition over the last 3.5 years. Who knows?
and start pointing people to the good stuff. You got good data today. She's going to maybe, look, there could be a rate cut in September. Start tweeting about it now. Of course, Tim Stenevec and Emily Grafeo about to hold forth on Bloomberg Business Week right after Balance of Power. Tim, what do you have coming up today?
Hey, we're talking to Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent, all about that data that you just mentioned. Plus, we're going to get an update about what exactly is going on in Paris, that massive attack on those trains. The opening ceremonies, they're underway now, Joe. But we'll get an update from Paris on what's going on there.
Can you explain the coconut tree to me next time we talk?
Yeah, I can do that. I can do it.
Just start Googling it now. Get your emojis ready. Tim, we'll be listening, of course, and Emily on Bloomberg Business Week. We'll meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power, 5 o'clock on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
A very good afternoon, everyone. Live on Bloomberg TV, radio, streaming on YouTube, and on Bloomberg Originals. I'm Tim Stenovec. Carol Master is off today. Joining me is Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Grafeo for this Friday edition of Bloomberg Business Week. How are you, Emily?
I'm good. I'm doing well.
Hey, thanks for joining me for the next hour on TV, the next 3 on TV, radio, and YouTube. And we got a great couple of hours coming up. This hour specifically, markets cheering a series of Fed-friendly data points, including core PCE figures that rose at a tame pace in June. Also, consumer spending remained healthy. Stocks up, yields down. More on that in just a minute with Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Mike McKee, who is standing by.
And still ahead, a quote, massive attack on Paris's super-fast rail network has disrupted trains and cast a shadow over tonight's opening ceremony. We have the latest on the sabotage and why, separately, the Olympic cyber team is bracing for an onslaught from hackers.
Okay, well, from hackers to comedy, Joe Rogan, the world's most controversial podcaster, widely considered the most popular podcaster in the world as well. He's building a Texas comedy empire after fleeing California. We get the latest from Felix Gillette.
And we're joined by the managing partner of Illumin Capital, a fund working to achieve racial and gender equity across investing.
All that and more over the next hour. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellett.
Hi, thank you very much, Tim and Emily. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, Russell 2000, NASDAQ 100 index, all rallying today with gains of 1% or more. The U.S. stock market getting a big boost at the end of a wild week after key economic data bolstered speculation that the Fed will set up the stage for a rate cut in September. Every major group in the S&P 500 higher right now. S&P back at 54.66, up now by 66 points, a gain of 1.2%. We're off session highs. The Dow up 690 points, up 1.7%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index up 182, higher now by 1.1%. The Russell 2000 of small cap, the index of small cap shares up now by 1.3%. 10-year 4.19% with a 2-year yielding 4.38%. Spot gold up $19 the ounce, up 0.8%. And West Texas Intermediate crude at right around $77 a barrel, down today by just about 1.3%. Dexcom shares are plunging after the company cut its full-year sales forecast for the glucose monitoring devices that are relied upon by diabetics. Shares today of Dexcom, they are now down by 41%. So again, recapping here, 700-point gain for the Dow, up 1.8%, S&P up by 1.3%. I'm Charlie Pellett, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
41%, that is what you call a haircut. Well, the Fed's preferred measure of underlying U.S. inflation, core PCE, rose at a modest pace in June. Consumer spending also remained healthy, encouraging signs for officials who are looking to cool inflation without breaking the economy. As far as the numbers look, core PCE, of course it strips out volatile food and energy, rose 0.2% from May. From a year ago, it rose 2.6%. That's according to Bureau of Economic Analysis data that came out this morning.